Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Monica Alba, and if it's Tuesday, voters are voting. Today, 6 states are holding primary elections, including a pair of Democratic races in Wisconsin and Minnesota that are set to test the staying power of the progressive movement after a string of wins this primary season, including last week in Michigan. In the Wisconsin governor's race, polls show Democratic Socialist Francesca Hong with a lead in a wild primary that seen candidates drop out and get back in the race. David Crowley, who recently re-entered the race and now has the endorsement of Wisconsin's outgoing governor Tony Evers, spoke with NBC's Shaquille Brewster about his closing message.
With this Democratic primary, what does it come down to? What's the key difference between you and your opponent?
Well, I think there's a lot of key differences. One, I mean, we're going to need someone who can build the necessary coalitions and speak to unity, not necessarily division. We don't need to continue to divide our party or divide our state or our country.
Do you think she divides the party?
I think that right now we have a lot of people where the emotions are extremely high right now, and people are tearing down other candidates in order to focus on their own.
Meanwhile, Hong is pitching a message of change while trying to distance herself from some of her previous left-wing positions, which Democrats worry could hurt her chances in the general election.
Be scary, but when I get scared, I look to the voters who remind me every day that not only are we deserving of change, but they get to be a part of making that change. This election belongs to the voters, and we'll let the voters decide.
What do you say to voters who see those comments and the back and forth about them and say it's either disqualifying or that in your clarification, you're trying to have it both ways?
What's disqualifying is Tom Tiffany still will not say who won the 2020 election. What's disqualifying is that he has voted to send tax dollars to forever wars, for gas prices going up, for grocery stores growing up. He doesn't care about Wisconsinites. He cares about the Trump administration, who he will put Trump first, and Wisconsin deserves a governor that will put Wisconsinites first.
In the Democratic Senate primary in Minnesota, Congresswoman Angie Craig is also making an electability pitch to voters as she faces Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan. Flanagan is running on a more progressive message and has criticized Craig for significant outside spending on her campaign's behalf.
We put this Senate seat at risk if the Lieutenant Governor is our candidate in November. I'm certainly making the contrast that I'm the experienced person in Washington who has a track record already of taking on Donald Trump and getting bills passed that make a difference in Minnesotans' lives.
This is up to the people of Minnesota if they want to send someone who's, beholden to corporate special interests, or if they want to send someone who's beholden only to Minnesotans.
And on the Republican side of things, a South Carolina special election to replace the late Senator Lindsey Graham on November's ballot could prove a test of the power of the president's endorsement. He's thrown his support behind the former senator's sister, Darlene Graham, in a crowded primary. Earlier today, Graham telling NBC's Ryan Nobles she expects this race to go to a runoff.
I expect to be in a runoff in 2 weeks. I feel confident that I will win.
Senator, what would you say to folks that are saying that you're just being handed this seat?
I don't see it that way. I'm not being handed this seat. I realize that I have to earn voters. So I'm working really hard to do that.
And joining me now is our NBC News team chief data analyst Steve Kornacki's at the big board with what he's watching for tonight. Shaquille Brewster is covering the Wisconsin governor's race from Madison. And Charles Benson, chief political reporter at our Milwaukee affiliate WTMJ, is in Milwaukee, where the city's absentee ballots are being counted. And chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles is covering it all in South Carolina. Thanks to you all for being here on this election day. Steve, let's start with you. What are you watching for in these progressive versus establishment races tonight?
Yeah, well, let's start in sort of the feature contest in that genre, and that is that Democratic primary for governor here in Wisconsin. A couple things. First of all, if you look at Hong and you look at where her path to victory would be tonight, I think you just think back a week ago to what we saw in Michigan with Al Sayed winning the Senate primary there. His vote, his support correlated pretty closely to the median age in counties in Michigan. The younger the median age, the better he was doing. The more you had like college towns, college areas, that's where he was getting running up the score, doing the best. So take a look here in Wisconsin. You got the mother lode of sort of the college town. That's Madison, Dane County. Dane's going to churn out more votes than any other county in Wisconsin probably tonight in this primary. You'd expect Hong to be doing very well there. You'd expect also some sort of smaller college towns. Think of Portage, you can think La Crosse County, places where you've got branches of the state university where the median age tends younger. That's where she's going to be looking to run up the score there. One other thing that I'm looking at here, though, is the interesting dynamic you got at it of how topsy-turvy this race has been with candidates getting in, candidates getting out. David Crowley, who is now her main opponent, the establishment, if they have any chance of stopping Hong, it's going to be with Crowley tonight. Remember, Crowley was out of the race for a little over a week in July. Then he got back in. He got back in because Sarah Rodriguez, the lieutenant governor, got out. The key point, though, is that as all of this drama was playing out in July and this field was being shaped and reshaped and candidates were getting in and candidates were getting out, something around 140,000 votes were cast in that month, in the month of July, by mail. Now, not all 140,000 of those are going to be for the Democratic primary, but we know that Democrats tend to vote by mail a lot more than Republicans. That means a big chunk of the vote in this Democratic primary was cast before this became the Hong-Crowley race that it essentially now is. So if Crowley has gotten a bunch of momentum late in this campaign to make this a game with Hong tonight, getting that sort of establishment wing to coalesce behind him, there's a world where he could get close but fall just short. And those 140,000 vote by mail that were cast long before this dynamic materialized could loom big.
That's fascinating. We'll definitely be watching for that. Tonight, Stephen, of course, we will see what happens in South Carolina. Do you think that this crowded Republican field could complicate a path to victory?
Yeah, I mean, look, you get an open Senate seat in a state like South Carolina, you get it anywhere, you're going to get a lot of interest. So you take a look here on the Republican side. The question here really is if somebody were to get an outright majority tonight, obviously they win, but it's the runoff likely. Who's getting first? Who's getting second? Most expect Darlene Graham will make that runoff. So the question then would be second place. And you've got here, just go through this, Ralph Norman is a congressman. Russell Fry is a congressman. Mark Sanford, a former governor, a former congressman, some other candidates as well. Just keep in mind sort of the regional variances here. Norman, okay, he just ran for governor unsuccessfully in the Republican primary. His base is right up here, York County around Rock Hill. It extends a bit into the upstate. A lot of Republican votes right there. Go to the sort of the Myrtle Beach area, the PD region, they call it. That is where Fry's congressional district is. So you look for him to run up the score right there. Sanford, when he was in Congress, was right here along the coast, but he might have a broader sort of a base of support, too, from his days as governor. But there's sort of the regional question right here. Is one of these candidates going to sort of get more of a bounce out of their home region that could get them potentially into that second place? But I think the expectation with Graham is her support may be more evenly, widely distributed around the state. So then the question is from these sort of regional candidates here, which one can pack the most punch from their neck of the woods?
Yeah, and we'll see about that runoff in just a couple of weeks. Steve Kornacki, thank you so much for all of your expertise there. And, of course, tune in tonight starting at 7 p.m. Eastern to the Kornacki Cam for special coverage of the results as they come in. That is on NBCNews.com and on YouTube. Plus, for even more expert analysis, scan the QR code on your screen right now and subscribe to the Data Dive with Steve Kornacki. Now let's head out to Wisconsin, where NBC's Shaq Brewster is there on the ground, as well as Charles Benson, as voters are doing what they do best, voting. Shaq, let's start with you. You've been talking to those voters in Wisconsin all day. What are they telling you about this primary?
Yeah, Monica, I'll tell you, it's definitely stressing out a lot of voters who I've been talking with. Some telling me as they left the polling booth that it's something that they didn't decide on until they were in that polling booth and making that final decision. It's a classic head versus heart battle for some of them. I want you to listen to some of the conversations I've been having with folks as they cast that ballot for this contentious race for governor. Why did you vote for David Crowley?
Because I think he can win.
A lot of people think she's like too radical, or not electable. But I think that she actually just knows what she wants to do, and she doesn't really play by what donors think she should do.
We're both really interested in the DSA candidate, but we're also both pretty worried about beating Tom Tiffany.
I think in a primary you get to vote for your conscience, and in the major election you tend to go for the candidate who the lesser of two evils, and so I voted for the candidate that was with my conscience.
So you voted Hong?
I voted
It's
Hong.
a divided household. Let me dig a little bit. Who did you vote for?
I voted for Crowley because I am a risk-averse person. And I really was reading a lot about, like, who has the chances to beat Tom Tiffany in the larger election.
I apologize to that couple afterwards for maybe pushing a little bit too hard, but it's that conversation that so many Democrats are having here, and you got a sense of that in our conversation there. For Crowley, he's saying that Hong essentially isn't ready for the limelight. We saw the fact that she's had to walk back some of her previous comments, including those involving canceling Thanksgiving. She says she no longer wants to do that. Hong is saying it's about the issues. She believes her issues are popular. Based on the conversations, they're popular among Democrats. The question is, do enough Democrats believe that they'll be popular with the general electorate when it gets to November?
A house divided. I love that, Shaq. Thanks for that. And also, we heard some of Crowley and Hong's closing message, but whoever wins will have to basically unite both wings of the party. So do the candidates have a plan for that part?
Yeah, they do. And specifically, the Democratic Party here has a plan for that. We know that there's going to be a unity breakfast that will take place tomorrow. You'll have the nominees for governor, for lieutenant governor, all there with some of Wisconsin's popular Democratic elected leaders, including Senator Tammy Baldwin. But we know it's not just going to be that breakfast. They're going to have 5 different days of events, dozens of stops across the state trying to preach that message of unity. I think one thing that's unique for Wisconsin compared to what we saw in Michigan just last week is while the primary definitely got contentious and you have a lot of messaging, a lot of focus on the front runner, it hasn't been as divisive. When we saw them on the debate stage, they were not slinging attacks at one another. This did not get deeply personal. Many of the voters I talked to said they would consider another candidate if that other candidate does win the nomination. So there's less work that needs to be done than we've seen in other states. But without a doubt, there's going to need to be that focus on unifying the party here if they want to have a good shot at taking down Tom Tiffany in November.
Shaq Brewster there. Thank you so much for your on-the-ground reporting. As always, Charles, I want to turn to you now over in Milwaukee. What's happening where you are? Take us behind the scenes.
Yeah, so I'm at a place called Central Count here in Milwaukee. This is where they count those early ballots that Steve talked about, the mail-in ballots and then, of course, the in-person absentee ballots. So about 20,000 ballots here that will help determine the outcome of the race. You know, we sort of have put this election around Francesca Hong versus David Crowley, Dane County versus Milwaukee County, where I am. And yes, Francesca Hong has built a solid base, not only in Dane County, but throughout the state. She's run a grassroots campaign using the phrase, a campaign for the many and not the money. So she's hoping the dividends of doing all of those early campaign organizing and door knocking and holding meetings will pay dividends. David Crowley coming into this race really late after being in it, drops out, gets back in with a key endorsement from Governor Tony Evers, the most popular politician in the state of Wisconsin based on job approval numbers. The other thing is, when I talk about Dane County versus Milwaukee County, this is where David Crowley has been elected twice as the county executive. It is the biggest county in the state of Wisconsin. So is he able to sort of overcome what the polls have said and climb this big hill that showed people still undecided? Can he make up that gap that was showing at least a potential here with that many undecideds? Can he close the race? That's what I'll be looking for tonight when the results come in. Milwaukee County, a big vote number versus Dane County, also a powerhouse for Democrats. Monica?
And Charles, how key are independent voters going to be heading into the general election there?
I think that's going to tell the story. Look, I think the Democrats are going to find a way to unite around whoever is the nominee. The Republicans have been united around Tom Tiffany, the likely Republican nominee. He does have a primary, but he was endorsed by President Trump. So each side will probably rally around their candidates. But it's the independents who are maybe going to be a little bit leery about a Democratic socialist, independents who are going to be leery about a President Trump endorsement. And so both sides are going to have to weigh those options as they fight for the independents, which I think could determine the outcome of this election, which is always close, as you know, in battleground Wisconsin.
Yeah, that's right. They often do. This will be a really interesting part of the race to watch for that test, as you laid out. Charles, thank you so much for your reporting. And turning now to South Carolina, where Ryan has the view from Columbia. Ryan, Darlene Graham told you she's feeling confident about a win, even if there is going to be a potential runoff. What are voters telling you?
Yeah, first, Monica, she's confident about a win, but she's also pretty confident that it is going to a runoff, which means it's likely not to cross that 50% threshold today, and it will mean that she'll have at least 2 more weeks of work ahead of her. And part of the reason that she's going to have 2 more weeks worth of work is that voters are a little bit skeptical that she might just being handed this seat by President Trump and by Republican Party leaders. Listen to what one voter told me this morning about that exact topic.
Like somebody that represents the people, and like somebody that is not necessarily given an opportunity just because of who their name is or who they are.
So I assume that means Darlene Graham. Are you worried that she's just being handed the seat?
Yeah, I do. I think that, I mean, I don't know what her past voting history is or what her issues are, really. I understand that she's lost a brother and lost someone who was very special to her, and I sympathize with that, but at the same time, I don't think that it's necessary just to give it to her.
And certainly it's anecdotal, but we did talk to quite a few voters who had a very similar sentiment, Monica. They like President Trump. They appreciate the fact that he's endorsed her. They like Lindsey Graham. They liked him, thought he represented their state well, but they just feel like they don't know enough about Darlene Graham to give her this seat for the next 6 years. We'll have to see how that translates in tonight's vote totals tonight.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that a little bit more, because as you say, voters are a bit unsure about her track record, but she has been serving as the appointed senator from South Carolina for this short window of time. So does what we've seen so far on Capitol Hill just over the past month give us any clues into where she may differ from her late brother?
Well, she's certainly making that argument to voters. She today touted the fact that she got the Russia sanctions bill over the line in her late brother's honor. She talked about her commitment to trying to get the president's voting changes bill to the Senate floor, even though that didn't happen. But what is interesting is the way she's making this pitch to South Carolina voters. She's acknowledged that what her brother was known for was his national security expertise, but she said that that's not going to be her focus. She's way more concerned about domestic issues like the rising cost of everyday goods. And that's put her into a tight spot because she has the president's support, but yet things like gas prices are still sky high. So she wants to make this about kitchen table issues. She's dealing with the legacy of her brother. She's dealing with an unpopular president. So all of those things are playing a factor in what we're seeing here in terms of voters heading into the polls tonight.
And Brian, you just mentioned the president. Of course, he has endorsed Darlene Graham. Do you think this is a true test of his endorsement strength with this race?
Make no mistake, every Republican candidate would like to have this endorsement. But what we're seeing play out here today is it's not going to be the end-all, be-all, at least at this stage. If Darlene Graham gets over the hump into the runoff and it's a one-on-one matchup, it's likely that Trump's endorsement will be more than enough to get her over the finish line. But she's got to get through this first stage first. Monica.
Ryan Noble's covering a race that would have looked a lot differently just some weeks ago with all of these recent changes, of course. Ryan Nobles, thank you so much, as always. And coming up, flying under the radar, NBC News confirms new details on the elaborate plot to hide President Trump inside a catering truck and secretly change planes to protect him from an Iranian threat. One of the Washington Post reporters who broke the story takes us inside the wild covert operation. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. NBC News is learning new details about an elaborate plot to secretly fly the president out of Turkey because of a threat from Iran. The Washington Post was the first to report the details of the operation that involves sneaking the president off of Air Force One onto a catering truck and into a different plane when he departed the NATO summit last month. You can see here on your screen President Trump boarding the older Air Force One in full view of the cameras. But minutes later, he was secretly carried off that plane via the catering truck you can see highlighted right there. That catering truck then pulls away from Air Force One and then pulls up near the rear stairs of a separate military C-32A plane that the president actually used to depart Turkey, making the traditional Air Force One essentially a decoy. A U.S. official telling NBC News that Secretaries Rubio and Bessent and other senior staff remained on the decoy plane, and that official also describing the Iranian threat as extremely serious and included the possibility of the use of shoulder-to-air missiles. The president secretly reboarded the decoy plane in the UK so he could publicly deplane and switch to his Qatari-gifted jet to fly back to Washington. Now, during the flight back, President Trump was pressed about security concerns and the decision not to fly the newly retrofitted plane out of Turkey.
Do you know why they had us close our window blinds? That was not usual.
Well, yeah, because you're, probably on a dangerous flight because of the sleazebags that we have to deal with.
So you think that Iran was possibly thinking, trying
Well, I mean, if they asked you to close your windows, probably they feel that way. They didn't ask me to close mine, but if they did, I would have done it. No, these are sick people. So I could see something like that. I didn't know they did that, but I could see something.
Were you aware of any credible threat by Iran against Air Force
Well, I have a threat all the time. I'm number one on their list before you. But if I go, you go, right?
If I go, you go. Well, at the time, the White House said it uses every tool at its disposal, including distraction and misdirection, to protect the president against any potential threat. When asked about the latest reporting, the White House did not dispute the details, instead reiterating that the new Air Force One is a state-of-the-art aircraft with high-level security protocols. Joining me now is one of the reporters on that story, John Hudson, national security reporter for The Washington Post. And also with me is NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce and Bobby McDonald, retired supervisory special agent for the U.S. Secret Service. Thank you all for being here for this conversation. John, of course, I have to start with you. Take us inside your reporting and this elaborate plan to secretly move the president to a different plane when he left Turkey.
Look, this is a pretty incredible circumstance. This is not just about the president moving from one plane to another plane. This is about a deception campaign that was aimed at deceiving a foreign power, but in the process deceived the American people, deceived the American press corps, and even deceived some White House officials who believed that they were on the plane carrying the president of the United States on Air Force One, when in fact the president was smuggled out of that plane in secrecy on a Turkish catering cart, moved to another plane, which took off and was flying around the same time the other Air Force One was flying. It's truly a historic Secret Service tradecraft event. And it raises all sorts of implications with how the White House deals with the American press and whether or not they're being straightforward enough when it comes to elaborate measures used to protect the president from a foreign threat.
Yeah, and a lot of questions that the White House still hasn't answered about some of that. But Dan, put this into context for us in terms of the threat assessment and environment that the president was facing at that moment, because at the time when he was there in Turkey, he was actively ordering the U.S. military to strike Iran. So what did that mean for what they were potentially looking at here in terms of the threats?
Well, imagine, Iran is just over the border. So he's in Ankara, which is within range of Iranian ballistic missiles, drones, right? And then, as you said, there was a specific threat, the White House says, that involved shoulder-launched weapons. And, of course, an F-15 fighter jet that's much faster than Air Force One and much smaller was hit and brought down by a shoulder-launched missile. And then on top of that, there has been a persistent threat from Iran against Trump now for years, dating back to the strike that took out General Soleimani, the Iranian general, in 2020, to the point where when he ran for president in 2024, The Secret Service increased his security protection because they believed there was an assassination plot from Iran targeting him. So I think it's fair to say there was an acute threat. Now, there's some contradictions because the president and the administration also talk about how the Iranian military has been devastated and decimated. But yes, there was clearly a threat there. And it does beg the question, right? Should he have gone to Ankara given the threat? You know, that's another thing to ask.
In the first place, because of the war that was ongoing while he was flying there. John, over the course of your reporting, pick up on that. I mean, is it clear to you what did trigger the White House to take such extreme measures in this case?
Well, what we learned is that it was a concern about a threat to the president's life stemming from Iran. In some ways, the context is clear. As Dan said, this is a country that borders Iran. But most importantly, this is a country that had its supreme leader assassinated in the opening days of the war. It's a country that had its political and civilian and military leadership killed at various echelons by U.S. and Israeli bombing. They have a rationale and a motivation to go after the president, and that's a real risk that the Secret Service has to take seriously. Now, we don't know how imminent it was. There are reports that some of this threat information was passed on by the Israelis. There are some intelligence officials who have said that the Israelis have inflated the threat posed by Iran in the past in order to influence U.S. decision-making, but there's really not enough information yet to speculate on the strength of it. All we do know is that U.S. officials clearly took it extremely seriously because they conducted this elaborate operation.
And it was the president himself who was kind of telling us about this in real time, saying that he had been shown some new intelligence, that he was on some of these lists, it appeared. But you're right, we don't have the full picture. But, John, typically for most people watching, they assume that any plane the president is on is Air Force One or would have that designation. But what did you learn about the call signs for these planes as they departed Turkey and landed in the UK?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The call signs, they played a bit of a shell game when it came to the call signs. The plane that the president actually got on that was basically the type of plane that the Secretary of State or the Vice President, it's a smaller Boeing C-2. And this plane does not have the big size of Air Force One, and it didn't have the Air Force One call sign. And so that's another one of the things when it comes to the flight tracker data and the public information airwaves that goes on that was more sleight of hand in the operation.
And Dan, weeks after that flight out of Turkey, we did learn that the Qatari gifted jet would need to be, quote, maxed out, that it was going to be sent basically for these additional measures and to be further retrofitted. What more are we learning about those additional security steps? And why would a plane like that then have been flying the president if it didn't have them in the first place?
Well, this has been a persistent question, right, that the White House has kind of struggled with. And there's been a debate and an argument, right? So any expert will tell you that it would take years to take a normal 747 and outfit it the way an Air Force One is supposed to be outfitted with all those security measures and features. And one of those would be a counter-missile system. And that is not on that Qatari plane. And there are other systems that aren't on there because it really requires dismantling the plane practically to put them on. And this was done on a really fast, tight schedule. And they've openly admitted that some options, as they call them, aren't on this Qatari plane. So again, it does pose the question, is that Qatari gifted plane ready for prime time?
Wow. Dan DeLuce and John Hudson, I know we will be talking about this incredible reporting for days and weeks to come. Thank you both so much. And I do want to turn now to Bobby and hear what your reaction to this story, first reported by the Washington Post, was after learning the details of this and given your background. What was your main takeaway?
Good afternoon, Monica. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think the first thing that jumped out at me is that this threat that was picked up by intelligence sources over in that region obviously had to be investigated quickly and obviously was deemed to be very credible, which then allows the Secret Service in concert with the White House administration and the White House military office to get together to come up with a plan to bring the president home from Turkey the way that they did. Those three elements work in concert together, whether the president is going to the Kennedy Center in D.C. for a quick visit, or if he's going domestically traveling, or if he's going internationally. So those three entities come together and work out a plan. Those plans are talked about anytime the president goes anywhere. They're chalk-talked. I can't say that every scenario is chalk-talked on every visit, but those folks get together, they know how to communicate, they know how to make the proper decisions and use the personnel and assets that they have on the ground with them there to develop a creative but nimble solution to the problem that was at hand.
So based on that, then is it your sense that this was a contingency plan that was already in the planning stages should it be needed when the president was traveling abroad to Turkey and then they essentially pressed go on the operation? Or is this a plan that they would have come up with a bit more in real time based on the threat environment?
Yeah, I don't think the specific plan was in place here, unless they knew that the threat element was going to be detected prior to the departure from Turkey. I think that this was something that was put together after the intelligence was gleaned on the ground there, and those entities came together and came up with a creative solution to the problem that was at hand. So I think it was done on the ground while they were in Turkey. But again, they may have had that intelligence before, but if that was the case, I doubt that the president would have headed that way.
And based on your years with the Secret Service, I mean, just how serious of a threat would there need to be for the Secret Service to take an extreme measure and secretly move the president and not reveal that publicly until we learned about it in the press? What does that tell you?
Yeah, Monica, look, the threat level right now, both domestically and internationally, is very high. You've seen over the last 26 months numerous attempts of assassination on the president and others. You know, the Secret Service doesn't have a metric to be able to tell what it stops with respect to assassination attempts. So I think the issue here is that we would love to keep the president in the White House all the time, not let him out, but that's not the American way. You've got a number of things coming up with the UN General Assembly in New York that the Secret Service will be handling all of those country leaders. You've got the midterm elections coming around the corner. There's a lot going on, and the Secret Service has to be sharp and continue to redevelop itself and be creative every single day to protect the president. There's a lot going on there. There has been precedent for other rather large-scale operations in the past with President Clinton and President Bush. So there is precedent out there. I can't say that the precedent lends itself to be as high on the operation scale as this one, but obviously this decision was made and this is the way they chose to go. I'm going to leave it to you and your colleagues at the White House to be asking those probing questions of the White House administration with respect to the answers that you want to get with those other things. I think we're missing some pieces of the puzzle here.
Yeah, we agree, and we certainly will be pressing on those. Let me just ask you, before I let you go, when we talk about the Qatari gifted plane that was retrofitted but needs additional measures, do you have any concerns about the president traveling on that luxury jet, given what we know now, especially when it comes to potential travel overseas, which the president will likely have in the coming months?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of the reporting on this issue. And look, I don't think that the Air Force or the administration or the Secret Service would let the president on that plane and travel domestically and or internationally unless it at least met with the standard of the previous plane. I also want to say I don't think that the two planes, as they move to England, with both Secret Service personnel, White House personnel, and press on the planes, I don't believe they were let out to dry or be on their own without any type of air support from the United States Air Force or our allies on the ground. I think that those were well protected. I don't know that we'll ever know the specifics of that, but I believe that they were part and parcel of this whole plan and were definitely looked out for while this process of this operation was going forward.
Rob McDonald, thank you so much for your time and expertise today.
Thank you, Monica. See you next.
And up next, the desperate search for survivors. Rescuers digging through mountains of rubble after a powerful earthquake rocked western Colombia. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are following breaking news out of Colombia, where rescue operations are underway after a powerful, deadly earthquake struck yesterday. At least 181 people were killed and hundreds of others were injured in the magnitude 7.4 quake, which rocked western Colombia. Overnight, firefighters rescued a 35-year-old man trapped beneath the rubble. And according to a citizen-run website, more than 3,000 people have been reported missing by family members. Officials say about 1,600 buildings were damaged or destroyed, including this one in Pereira, which collapsed after the earthquake. This was the scene inside an airport there, where you can see parts of the ceiling collapse during the quake. Several airports in the region remain closed. And after the break, odd couple. The Democratic and Republican senators from Pennsylvania are teaming up, and not everyone is thrilled about it. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We've got some bipartisan election news today out of Arizona, where Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs announced she's picking former Mayor John Giles, a Republican turned independent, to be her running mate. Governor Hobbs is facing a potentially tough re-election fight against the Republican nominee, Congressman Andy Biggs. Meanwhile, in other bipartisan news, some Democrats are expressing anger and anxiety over the budding friendship and partnership between Pennsylvania's two senators, Democrat John Fetterman and Republican Dave McCormick. As NBC News' Allan Smith reports, the Senate's newest odd couple is raising Republican eyebrows and Democratic alarms. And Allan Smith joins me now. Allan, thanks for being here. So tell us, how did this partnership between the senators develop, and what have they actually accomplished together so far?
Well, after Senator McCormick won his seat in 2024, former staffers to John Fetterman told me the senator was really eager to build a relationship with him out of the gate. And, you know, since then, their families have become pretty close. They've spent a lot of time with one another, and they've really taken it upon themselves to promote their relationship as a model for bipartisanship. Now, they have not really, managed to accomplish much legislatively so far, but they have, embarked on a number of initiatives, including creating a joint fundraising account that garnered a lot of attention.
And Allan, you report that Republicans are touting this as a sort of model of bipartisanship, while Democrats worry that it could lead to them losing one of their own. So tell us more about what is leading to Democrats' anxiety in particular here.
The joint fundraising committee that they launched, which was quite unusual, is at the top of the list for Democrats who are saying, what is going on here? I'll read a quote from Chris Deluzio, who's actually a potential primary challenger to Senator Fetterman in 2028. He said, I really have a problem with John Fetterman helping the Republicans to fundraise to beat Democrats in congressional races, and that's what this is. I'm doing everything I can so that we can win those districts, and to have John Fetterman now helping Republicans raise money to beat us, it's crazy stuff. Pennsylvania is home to 4 really pivotal swing House races this fall, and Chris Deluzio, along with some others who are really are saying what Senator Fetterman here is doing is quite confusing in a campaign season.
And you also report that Senator Fetterman could face primary challengers in 2028. Of course, he's not up this year, but who could challenge him? Give us a sense of that.
Well, Congressman Deluzio is certainly one person who could mount a primary challenge to him. There's also former Congressman Connor Lamb, who spoke with me for this story. He had run against Fetterman in 2022 and fell short in that primary. Congressman Brendan Boyle from the Philadelphia area, someone else who could run. And there's also been rumors that maybe Congresswoman Summer Lee might run also. Now, what's interesting here is that the more people who run in the primary, there's actually a better chance that Senator Fetterman could emerge from it, even though his numbers with Democrats are not very strong right now. The more people who are in such a race would create a lane where he could potentially survive. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out.
We talked about some of the agita from Democrats, but on the flip side, why is Dave McCormick not facing any backlash for agreeing to work with a Democrat?
I mean, Senator McCormick and some Democrats have even said, he's managed this relationship really in an impressive way. But he hasn't had to really make any overtures for Democratic initiatives as part of this relationship. I mean, he and Fetterman brought a booth to the Great American State Fair that President Trump held last month for Pennsylvania after Governor Josh Shapiro said no Pennsylvania businesses were willing to show up. He went with Senator McCormick, or Senator Fetterman went with Senator McCormick to Philadelphia to promote the Trump Accounts initiative. So there's really a lot of different Republican initiatives that they have promoted hand in hand. But, Senator Fetterman's former staffers are saying they aren't really seeing what Senator Fetterman is getting back in the other direction from his GOP counterpart.
As Senator Fetterman said on this show just a couple of weeks ago, that he will not become a Republican, but has still threatened to potentially leave the Democratic Party. Fascinating stuff. Allan Smith, thank you so much for bringing us your reporting.
Thanks, Monica.
And coming up, the panel is here to talk about tonight's races, plus why the president's latest move on vaccines may be the last thing his party needs ahead of midterms. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back on this primary day. Republicans are trying to cast Democrats as extremists ahead of the midterms and trying to tie the entire party to the growing Democratic Socialist movement. Here's Georgia's Republican Senate candidate Mike Collins on the campaign trail yesterday.
John Ossoff came out in support and endorsing that Abdul El Said, the Democrat Socialist of America movement candidate up there. I think all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together now, because John Ossoff is the tip of the spear of this thing, y'all. They do want him to run for president. John Ossoff votes 92% of the time with Bernie Sanders, and he's looking for the next person to take that mantle, and that's who it's going to be. And they got to get him reelected here in Georgia. And this is not just for Georgia to get rid of John Ossoff. This is for this country, and we need to stop this now in November.
Joining me now is our panel: Shelby Talcott, White House correspondent at Semaphore; Antoine Seawright, Democratic strategist and CEO of Blueprint Strategy; and Rick Tyler, Republican strategist. Thank you all for being here. Shelby, I do want to start with you and talk about this strategy, it seems, by Republicans to try to lump all Democrats together under this Democratic Socialist label. What do you make of that?
I mean, it's not surprising, I don't think, because there are progressive candidates, and we've been hearing about this for months. I've talked to administration officials and people who are involved in the midterms who, as soon as some of these candidates on the Democratic side got into the race, they said, if this person wins, this is going to be our strategy. So it's not surprising from the Republican side. I also think, though, the question that the administration is grappling with is how can they not only try to paint these progressives as A, extremists, and also B, indicative of the Democratic Party writ large, but also provide voters with a solution. And I think that latter is where they're still trying to answer the question of, okay, if not them, then what is the Republican Party providing for these voters?
And it does seem like we're getting a sense from the White House in some of their talking points that they will continue to talk about, Bernie Sanders and Zohran Mamdani and Abdul El-Sayed. Is that your sense that that is sort of going to be the roadmap, the blueprint here?
That's the roadmap. They're painting these individuals as the heads of the Democratic Party. They're saying these progressives are what the Democratic Party stands for. And the reason that they're doing that is they believe that some of these more progressive policy stances that we've heard from some of these candidates are too extreme for moderate voters who are going to be voting in a general election. And that's where they think that they're going to be able to pick off some of these voters, even the voters who they will say are not necessarily happy with the status quo here in Washington.
And Rick, it was a little bit surprising. We saw NRSC Chair Senator Tim Scott predict on Sunday that he's optimistic that it's possible Republicans could get a 54-seat majority in the Senate. Do you agree? And what do you make of this strategy?
I'm optimist. I do think that's optimistic. Look, the Democrats can say, and I've heard establishment Democrats also say, that these candidates that they're fielding for nominations today in Wisconsin, you have a Democratic Socialist running for governor, and then you have one in Michigan last week. These people would not be extreme in New York City or Brooklyn, certain parts of Brooklyn, but in Michigan, they are. And if you actually want to win the Senate, fielding these kinds of candidates who have very controversial positions. In fact, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was trying to bail one of them out and misstepped, calling Hung, woke 1.0. I mean, that's not help. That doesn't help at all. Look, the woke movement, in my view, gave away the middle class voters from the Democrats to the Republicans, and now the Democrats are trying to win them back. The interesting thing that I think is worth really thinking about is both the Republicans from the Trump point of view, from the MAGA point of view, and from the Democratic Socialist point of view, it's all economic populism. They have different solutions, but the language and the complaints are actually exactly the same, that the system is rigged against you and here are my solutions. And both Democrats and Republicans are very angry about it, but populism is not going to work. It's not going to get you there.
Fear, racism, division, and uncertainty has been an electoral strategy for the MAGA movement in particular that has worked in some cases. The difference between then and now is they have tatted all over their bodies this affordability crisis. They have corruption laying at their feet, and they also have a healthcare crisis that are affecting 18.2 million Americans in places where they have been electorally successful. They cannot run away from that. My advice to my party and our candidates, yell in the places you agree, whisper in the places you disagree. The one common denominator we can all focus on is the affordability crisis and how we improve the quality of life for everyday Americans.
Antoine, let's actually turn to that exact issue, and in Minnesota in particular, because, of course, voters are voting there today. But also, we had Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan on the show yesterday, and she spoke to this about trying to unify the party after such a competitive primary and what they feel they need to do there. Let's play that sound.
I mean, I think it has to be a broader anti-Trump message. And I certainly think that's where, Congresswoman Craig and I will be unified in making sure that Democrats hold this seat no matter what happens. We can't afford to give this, Donald Trump one more seat in the United States Senate. The grift has to stop. We will hold this seat. And if she is victorious tomorrow, I will absolutely support her.
But for Democrats, is unifying around that anti-Trump message going to be enough in a general election?
I think that's one element because, truth be told, voters will always make it easier to vote against something than it is to vote for something. But our main strategy has to be consolidation and expansion. There's no doubt in my mind the Republican Party electorate has shrunk since the 2024 election cycle. There's also no doubt in my mind there are a lot of angry people out there who want to try something different. We have to give them something different to try. So it's a base plus election, which means independent thinkers and independent voters in some of these battleground places are going to be critical to the constituencies we need to win.
This is precisely why Trump got elected, when they wanted to try something different. It's all economic populism. And we can see this in Europe. We can see it all over the world, is the far right or the far left have these wacky ideas because they don't have to govern it. Because governing is actually, taking responsibility is actually hard to do. And yet they can snipe from the sidelines and people say that. But they're both parties are very angry about the same thing. They do feel like the system is rigged against them. They think it works for the rich. It doesn't work for the poor. It doesn't work for the working class. Trump won the working class. The Democrats are clearly trying to win it back, but they won't do it in states like Michigan with some of these wacky views that they have.
Except we have to, unfortunately, voters expect us to offer them something. And not just say
normal people, and they would clean the field.
Republicans don't have to.
It's a bad year.
From a policy prescription, they don't have to offer anything. They can just put their names on the ballot and get away. We have to offer.
But now they've turned the conversation between are you a socialist or not, and do you believe that we should get rid of the Senate? Do you believe that we should tax millionaires and billionaires out of the state? That's what the conversation is turning.
And that's a big part of the conversation,
Correct.
Certainly, and for both parties. But another part of this conversation might be, Shelby, what the president just rolled out, once again trying on vaccines yesterday, something that parents and families, of course, care deeply about. The president reiterating some baseless claims yesterday. But what is your take on why the White House decided to do this? why they are doing this even closer and closer to the midterms when we know, according to some reporting, that there had been warnings to RFK Jr., the HHS secretary, to lay off some of this vaccine talk because it can be politically toxic.
The simple answer is usually the easiest when it comes to the president. This is something he's been interested in for a really long time, actually, and he's talked about it for decades. And despite there being some people in the administration who are hesitant to make the vaccine conversation top of mind for voters, the president wants this, and he's very interested in it. And one thing that I think is really interesting is how, if you look at the executive order that the president rolled out yesterday on vaccines, it doesn't mention the autism argument that we heard a lot from the president. And so you're seeing, I think, a little bit of the disconnect between how the president is linking this and what the president wants to focus on and how maybe some of his advisors are trying to massage it.
Do you think, Rick, he should be talking more about that?
No, it's preposterous. His press conference was embarrassing yesterday. There is no link between vaccines and autism that we know of. It's been debunked 24 different times with 24 different studies. And so
no scientific
distractions come in many forms. Add this to add this as a page to the catalog of distractions brought to you by Donald Trump and the Republican Party.
Shelby, Anton, Rick, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much. We will be back tomorrow, of course, with more Meet the Press Now. There's much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.